Hey everyone, I'm Devon Dickinson. Welcome to the Faith and Entrepreneurship Podcast. I'm here with Lauren, and we've got some fun stuff to go over today.
Hi, Devon. How are you?
Doing great.
Good. So what I got for you today is we've gone through all our listener questions that we get. We get a lot. Obviously, we try to answer them as many as possible on the show or try to do a show about them. But I took the five questions we see most often and put them together. And I thought we'd do a show that just is answering your most asked questions.
Great. So these are just random. They don't connect. Okay.
No connection to them.
Great.
Just we see them very often.
Great. Sounds good.
Okay. So number one is, when should I sell my company?
I'll speak for me personally. And then I think people can maybe relate from that. But for me personally, it was different when I was 40 years old versus now I'm 53. When you're a little younger, I would say you can probably be a little more patient and try to time it a little bit more with the industry. But I think the older you get, timing becomes a little less relevant from a financial perspective. Like, when I was younger, I was kind of like, hey, I can wait till the company's like at this peak and, get about to right before it's about to level off. And then I can wait until the market's right and kind of really time it. And I was fortunate we were able to pull that off. But I was younger, right? I didn't have these other time pressures and constraints. And now I'm a little bit older. So I only have one child left in high school, only about a year and a half left. And then she's out. And so now I think less about timing things perfectly and more about just what's right for the company and what's right for me. And it's less about how many zeros and the dollars and cents and timing it, and more around just making a really good decision for the company and me. And so I think it's a little bit individualized. And so I think people need to take those two things into consideration. One is, is there some financial timing that you can maybe thread the needle on? But secondly, and probably a little more important, what's right for you and your family and the company?
Okay, number two, how do I make a good hire?
I think this is a great question. And a lot of times when people ask me that, they think that they're going to hire this person, that person's going to solve all their problems. Yeah. So I think first off, getting a realistic view of what this person is going to do, right? And if you can't clearly define in a job outline their duties and what their definition of success is, you're probably not you're not going to make a good hire, period, right? Mm-hmm. So I would start with truly understanding the need that you're trying to fill. And if you can't clearly define it, don't do it, right? Maybe it's 2 hires, maybe it's no hires, maybe it's just you need to do a better job, right? But if you can go and you can clearly outline exactly what this person's going to do and what their definition of success is, I think you're probably 70, 80% of the way there. And then after that, I would say interview. And don't just hire the first person, right? Because you need to compare and contrast. So those would be a couple rules of thumb I would do if I was going to make a good hire.
Next one, how often should I and how do I evaluate my vendors? So there's 2 questions there.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I want to make a delineation here. I think in business, you're going to have folks who are vendors, and then you're going to have vendors who are actually partners, if you understand what I mean. And I say this, and I'll kind of give you, some rules of thumb. Like a vendor provides a service, but they're not necessarily tied to your financial, you succeeding. Mm-hmm. A lot of these people would be software. They provide a service, and basically they're trying to raise their prices every year, and you're trying to get them to stay low. I'll say Salesforce, for instance, right? With Salesforce.
I was thinking of CRM.
Yeah, exactly. We pay a ton of money to them, and they would like to say that they're our partner. And so if you're watching Salesforce right now, trust me, you can do a much better job of being a partner. But they like to say they're our partner, but really at the end of the day, they treat us like a customer rather than a partner. And, they're trying to constantly get us to spend more, constantly trying to, change terms and raise our prices and whatnot. And I don't blame them. Listen, I'm not blaming them for that. That's why I own stock in them, because they're a good company and they're needed. But I think of them as a vendor, mm-hmm. right? Partners, I think, are people that are truly working with you to make your company better and their company better. So a lot of times these would be people that are like manufacturing partners, folks that, if you're making a car, they make the tires and the wheels, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so you're kind of like together and you want to work together and you have kind of a together approach. Like, hey, if we don't succeed, you don't succeed. If you don't succeed, we don't succeed, kind of thing. And so I think first off, Dylan, figure out which ones are which ones.
Yeah.
Vendors, you want to negotiate hard and like constantly. Like you want to always be aware of when your renewal dates are and you want to negotiate intelligently against those. So like not waiting until like the last day of the last month before you renew, right?
Yeah. And let me jump in here because you said constantly.
Yeah.
Like, and in my head, I'm thinking constantly monthly, or are you saying constantly like yearly? But starting that process much earlier.
Yeah, I think truly understanding the growth of your business and how it relates to your vendors. So let's say you're going to have a head count that are going to increase by 20. Well, in Salesforce, you're going to have to get 20 more licenses. So really, if you can, as you're negotiating early to bring those licenses on, like what can you do in your contract? Hey, if we're going to give you 20 more licenses, what can you do for us? And so you're constantly figuring out any at all leverage that you might have to be able to hopefully negotiate better terms, or at least keeping them from sticking it to you with their terms. So I would always be aware of it. And if there's a scenario where there are two adequate, vendors, like really vetting out why are we choosing one over the other and what would be the tipping point to switch vendors, right? So, Salesforce is interesting. Like, people get very tied up and it's very difficult sometimes for people to leave Salesforce, but you can, right? And so understanding like who would we go to and how can I leverage that? So we have lots of those type of vendors where like you want to know what their competitor is offering. Is their competitor offering something better? Is their pricing better? And try to use that as leverage. So that's what I mean by always. So understanding the market to make sure at the very least that you're being treated fairly at renewals and whatnot if you have to continue on with them. But on the partnership side, like I said, those are the folks where literally you want to have sit downs with them and you want to say, what can we do to make your life easier so that you don't have to raise our prices, right? Like, how can we partner together so that we both make more money, right? And having very open, transparent conversations. Hey, this is what our growth looks like. If you can do this for us, this is what we can do for you. And really, like, at the end of the day, you're responsible for your bottom line. They're responsible for your bottom line, but they're intertwined. And when people find relationships like that and they have professional conversations, you typically can end up with really great relationships where at the end of the day, everyone can win. And so the more people you can take from the vendor side and move them to the partner side, the better you're going to be.
Next question. Do I buy or lease my property?
When I first got into business, I read this article about how to create long-term wealth. And the answer was pretty simple. It was like, invest in this, do your 401k, buy your house. But one of the things it said is if you own a business, buy your property that the business resides in. And I remember reading that going, that sounds simple enough to me. I'm going to do that. And so it's a great idea. And I highly recommend that if possible, and it meets certain criteria, right? And some of the criteria, the criteria that I would look at is, first off, if you're like, depending on the type of business you're in, right? Like, so if you're retail and you're like, well, I can buy this location, but it's not as good as renting in this location, well, you need to rent, right? Because retail is all dependent on location, right? So depending on the type of business you're in, that just might not even be an option, right? But like a restaurant, like you have to have the right location, regardless if you can buy the building or not.
Yeah.
But if your location doesn't so much matter and you have an opportunity to buy the building for the right price, and you're going to be in there, as a rule of thumb, I'm going to say, longer than 5 years. And I think, probably I would bend towards buying it. But if you're not sure kind of what the next 5 years holds, And you can get a favorable lease, meaning they don't make you sign a long-term lease, like a 7-year or 10-year. You can get a favorable lease, and the lease rate is great. And sometimes it's easier just to take the simple, I'm going to lease until I figure out what the future looks like. And then also, like, there's things to consider when you buy a building, like what happens when that AC goes out and all of a sudden you have a $25,000 unexpected bill, or, you've got lawn care, you've got maintenance, you've got water pipes that break. You have all this stuff that you're ultimately responsible, where you're trying to run a business. And if you're like me, you're not super handy, or, want to deal with contractors, stuff like that. So, there's maintenance that goes into owning something as well, that you kind of got to calculate in that cost, plus taxes, all these other different things. Whereas, kind of a grossed up lease where you just write one check a month, there's some peace of mind to that too. So, but, I like to, my preference would be, if I know I'm going to be there, I'm going to work really hard to buy the building right, be patient, and then go in there and pay myself rent. So that would be my preference. But I think you have to there's a lot of factors coming into place. The other thing I would say, the last thing to consider, is that things have changed so much in 2025 as we're filming this, where like remote work, like I would have never considered that. Now, my one company is 100% remote, and my other company will be probably 85% remote by this summer. So, considering stuff like that, like, hey, do we see ourselves eventually going remote? They now have co-working where we're filming right now. I own a co-working space. Considering some of that, and does something like that meet your needs? Because then you can even go month to month, right? Co-warehousing, stuff like that. There's some really creative solutions out there that didn't used to be out there that, also are something that I think people need to consider as well, because the world is changing, and really understanding that what might have been true for me 20 some years ago might not be true now. So those are the things I'd take into consideration.
Awesome. Okay, last question. This is a fun one.
Okay.
If you were starting your business all over again, what would you do differently?
Oh, wow. Do you want the list alphabetically, numerically? I mean, there's so many things I would do.
How much time do we have?
Yeah, how much time do we have? Let me try to narrow it down to a couple biggies that I would do differently. One, I think I would have listened to I would have tried to get close to my customer base and really understand their needs and their feedback, positive and negative. I think that would have helped us evolve quicker. So that's the one thing I would do. Second thing I would do is I would evaluate profitability amongst my product lines quicker. I didn't, I think I always knew this. Like, I knew that there were some things we did that was really profitable and other things we did that were not so profitable. But it wasn't until I really took time to like drill down that I realized that, hey, some of these things that I thought weren't just super profitable were actually like losing money. And some of these things that I was kind of neglecting were like incredibly profitable and, like holding the ship together. So I think I would have understood my basically our profitability a little bit better. So those are probably the two biggest things that I would, off the top of my head. Let me think if there's one more thing.
Do you ever look back and think about the time you spent thinking about it and then finally making the decision and think like, I should have moved faster? Or do you think you moved at the right time?
I should have moved faster, but I think there's these, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, and it takes, like, even when you think you do know it, because you do have the numbers, when you're new in business, you second guess yourself, and there's a confidence thing. I think now I have more confidence, more pattern recognition. I probably would move faster than I had then. So I probably should have moved faster. But one thing that I think that ties into the third thing that I would have done is I would have given myself a little more time for headspace. Because, if you think about those first two things I talked about, you're only going to identify that if you have headspace time. And in the beginning, when you have business, like you got to grind. I was grinding. Like, I talk about how I lost my hair. I really did. I was 4 a.m. I went to bed. I mean, that was it. And it was literally like nonstop. Like, I don't want to say I never took a day off. That's not true. But like, I just worked constantly. That's all I did was work. I think had I allowed myself a little bit more headspace during that time, a little bit more of a Sabbath, during that time, I probably would have been able to make better decisions quicker. So that would have been the third thing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Those are our questions.
Oh, that was actually really fun. Yeah, we should do this. We should do this every
We
month.
can do it again.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Lauren. Hey, everyone. I hope this helps you. And hey, feel free to send us questions. We love getting these. And it's always fun to, she just fires them off at me and take a trip down memory lane. And so this is a fun one. I hope this was fun for you.